through the lens, gaze, part 1. The essential questions that we need to ask about gaze is, what is gaze? What is the psychology of gaze? How does gaze in the individual work? And gaze in society? And then you're doing your first experiment, which is being uncomfortable and gazing. So what is gaze? Gaze, defined, is to view or look at something intently. So it's more than just looking at something or glancing at something. It's to look with intent. You want to cause an effect. So physically, this doesn't only involve your eyes, but involves the position of your head and neck, and it's something that happens unconsciously. And it's how you have that connection between you looking at somebody and their reaction to it. In this painting, you can see what she's looking at. She's looking out of the painting that she exists in, and she is confronting you. And what do you think her attitude is? What do you think she is feeling emotionally? Does she look like she is powerful? Does she look like she's afraid? What is she communicating to you by the way she's looking with her eyes? The psychology of gaze means a whole lot more than just that intent look. It also refers to your recognition of self-awareness in relation to other people, like those times where all of a sudden you become aware that you are this three-dimensional creature and not just your mind, because we go through our day with our mind and thinking, and then all of a sudden you snap into awareness of your body and its position and where it is in relation to others. Gaze is also a physical and psychological way to show power and dominance over people, and it's part of visual communication that's used to control the viewer's interpretation of art. And that's both how the viewer looks at the art, how the art looks back at the viewer, and where, especially if there's figures in the artwork, how the figures are looking at each other. This is probably one of, if not the most famous photograph from National Geographic. And the Afghan girl, she is now grown up quite a bit. When they took her picture, they did not record her full name, and people became obsessed with this photograph. Not just because of her incredibly interesting eye color, but her gaze at the viewer. There was a connection that had some power to it psychologically just by looking at her photograph. And people were so entranced that they eventually sought her out and found her again. So gaze in the individual is your self-awareness, the awareness of your physical state as well as your consciousness, your mental state. And it's also that instinctive behavior that lets you know when somebody's watching you. You actually feel their gaze. If somebody is staring at you, or, whether they're behind you or across the room or out in public. And you've seen this probably with little kids too. What are you looking at? When somebody all of a sudden says that, and you're like, I wasn't looking at anything. And they're like, yeah. Because you can physically kind of feel the sensation of somebody looking at you for an extended period of time with intent. And that's a survival mechanism, because when a predator is stalking its prey, that's what it does. It fixates, the lion looks at the gazelle and fixes on that gazelle and kind of blocks out everything and stares at that gazelle while it's planning its little attack path. So gaze in the individual, paranoia. Paranoia is the mental state of being afraid of others, afraid of being watched and judged. And it results in not just fear and anxiety, but also an awkward self-awareness, being overly cautious about how you do and say things, how you move, act, how you present yourself. If you saw the last episode of Bob's Burgers this past season, Louise was very paranoid about using the bathroom in public because she was afraid that other people were watching and listening to her and everything else, and she wouldn't. Paranoia includes the image of the all-seeing eye, which is a Masonic symbol. It's also on our dollar bills. It's used to represent the Illuminati. It's the idea that society and organizations can watch you, can track your behavior, record your behavior. Gaze in the individual, self-esteem and recognition. So your self-recognition begins when an infant encounters their reflection. And this is true for animals as well. If you've ever had a puppy and put a mirror in front of it for the first time, it really, it doesn't realize that it's not its own reflection. It thinks it's another dog, and then it gradually comes to the realization of, wait a minute, that's just me. Same thing with babies. And then you become aware that you're a physical being, and that's what you look like, and that kind of gets inscribed in your head. In our modern society, reflections are very common because of a lot of mirrors, of course, but also glass and also photographs. We take more photographs now than ever. People are more familiar with their faces now than ever because of selfies. And because that physical self-recognition is closely tied to our self-esteem. It's tied to how we view ourselves both as physical beings and as members of society, and how we are equipped to interact with other people. Personal power. Gaze can be used to create this. If you make direct eye contact with somebody, it's viewed as a challenge. In other cultures, direct eye contact is avoided because it's viewed as disrespectful. If you look at somebody in their eyes, you're challenging their authority, and that's extremely disrespectful. However, in contemporary mainstream American culture, direct eye contact is viewed as being respectful and as treating each other as equals. So, for example, if you're in a business meeting and you go to meet a boss because you're having a job interview, you should make direct eye contact because it shows that you consider yourself to be equal and you're not afraid of any challenges, and that you are a person who can handle things. Where if you don't meet the boss's eyes, in our culture, it comes off as you're being timid, you're weak, you're shy, you're avoiding responsibility and things of that nature. But when you stare somebody down, that's a challenge, and whoever drops their eyes first loses power. That's the whole psychology behind the staring contest that people play. Staring at somebody for a long period of time is considered rude and creepy. And here we have one of the creepiest staring people of all times, Mr. Ted Bundy. Dominance is created using gaze. Societies use gaze for the same reason, to reinforce social roles. So reflect back on life and think about adults. If they thought you were lying or trying to get away with something, did they ever tell you, look me in the eye? No, look at me while I talk to you. And force you to make that eye contact. They're asserting that dominance over you. And think about situations like school, where how school used to be when you're sitting in a crowded classroom and people might be talking or not paying attention, or somebody sneaking out their cell phone, and all of a sudden the teacher looks at them, and you know right away they recognize, oh, wait a second, I was being bad, I got to stop this now. Okay? Or the teacher asks a question and looks at you, and you know that you're the one that's expected to answer. That's controlling people through gaze. Curiously enough, that's how sheepdogs work too, is they don't have to actually run and chase the sheep. Cow dogs, the same thing. They can also direct and control the sheep just by looking at them and gesturing with their head and their eyes. Objectification is when gaze transforms people into objects, like Medusa turning people into stone, but looking at a person and depersonifying them. So you take away the awareness that they are an individual human being and they just become a thing. Like if you go to the zoo and you look at a lion, you don't know that lion. You don't know its likes and dislikes and personality and habits, but it's interesting, so you look at it. This photograph became a kind of popular meme, and it's a good illustration of objectification. You have the couple, and she obviously is looking at the man and giving him, the stink eye, the dirty look, and he is looking at the woman in red, but he's looking at her as an object. He's not viewing her as a person. He's viewing her as a pretty thing. Objectification can be positive. For example, surgeons, when you are operating, you focus on the procedure and not on the person. Because if you get into the mindset of, oh, this is a person and I have to cut them open and play with their innards, you might get a little freaked out, you might get a little too emotional. But if you don't focus on the person, you just focus on the spleen, then you can just do your job. It can also occur on purpose. Uniforms are a good example of objectification because it makes people less individual. And when you are uniformed, a leader is easier to give directions because she's giving it to a member of a unit instead of one direct person. And that's illustrated by the photograph in band. Some of you might have been in band at one point in your life. You probably have watched the band at games and whatnot. And you have the uniform band out in the field, and the drum major is up on the stand. So the band is uniform, and she is not focusing on Fred the trumpet player or whatever. She's focusing on the sections, and it's not just her gestures and her movements, but also her gaze, her looking at a section when it's time for them to play and looking away from them and directing them with just her eyes and her vision. And then objectification can be negative. When people are judged by their looks rather than their whole being and fit into stereotypes or fit into just being treated as objects. So think of things like sex symbols. Think about inequality and how people view people who are different than they are. Think about how homeless people become invisible, and a lot of people don't even actually see them or recognize them when they pass by them on the street. So, your experiment, your assignment is to become uncomfortable. So you're going to record your results in your sketchbook. You can write notes, you can draw it or whatever. Pay attention to your results. And you can do this at any time during your day or evening. It's a little rude, a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. If you get called out on it, just explain it was an assignment. So you have to do 3 things. First thing, you have to stare at yourself in a mirror for 3 minutes. These will feel like the longest 3 minutes of your life. Stare at your face and watch what happens. And write down or record what happens. Second thing, stare at another person until they notice. A lot of, we're pretty much at home right now still. So pick out a family member who's watching TV or playing on their phone or something and stare at them until they realize that you're staring at them. And what do? Do they say something, or do they just start twitching, or what? Get up and leave? And then the last one, stare at an animal until they notice. But don't do it if you have an aggressive dog. Don't stare at that dog, because if you stare at an aggressive dog, that's a signal for them to start getting aggressive and stand their ground. They interpret it as a power. If you don't have an animal, challenge a friend to a staring contest, either on FaceTime or in real life or however you want to do it. See if you can't stare each other down. Okay? Record your results in your sketchbook and go ahead and upload it, because that's easy and it only takes a minute. Alright? I will see you soon. No pun intended. I am so corny because I'm old. Bye.